Welcome to The Right Call. My name is Mark Altman, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Cole Altman. Cole, how the heck are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Cole, I am so fired up to do this podcast today. I've been itching to do this with you because there's so many things that happened this week, specifically in football. And I want to get right to the Brian Flores situation right out of the gate. And for those of you who aren't familiar specifically, there's two facts I want to call out right out of the gate. And Cole, then I'm going to go right to you. Fact number one is there is a rule in football called the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule requires that NFL teams set up at least one minority interview in the process of hiring. And if you don't, there's a penalty and there's a punishment. And so what's coming to light now is there's a term that's being used in the NFL called a sham interview. And a sham interview is basically you're going through the motions. You're checking a box. Essentially, you're interviewing a black candidate because you have to, not because you either want to or are really seriously considering hiring that black candidate. So here's what's going on. Brian Flores is suing the NFL, filing a complaint. Number one, he's suing them for what he's calling a sham interview with the Giants after Bill Belichick mistakenly texted Brian Flores when he was intentionally trying to text Brian Daboll to congratulate him on the Giants job. And the second thing he's inferring is when he went to interview for the Broncos interview back in 2019 when Vic Fangio got the job, the Broncos brass showed up an hour late. They looked hungover. They weren't engaged or invested in the interview. So before we get to the tanking game thing, let's talk about the Rooney Rule and the sham interview first, Cole. What's going on here? 70% of the NFL is black. What the heck is wrong with these group of racist owners?
I don't know. I think a lot of these owners are white rich men, and I think a lot of them are 50 to 70 years old, and they grew up in the generation of black people aren't equal to white people.
Yep.
And I think they've taken that with them, and I think they look at black owners as not as good. And even though that's not true, I think that white owners have misinterpreted the skill set of many black coaches, and I think that's why we don't see as many black coaches and owners and GMs in our league, and why we see more black players than that.
And I can give you two examples, Cole, right out of the gate. Arizona hired a guy named Steve Wilks, an African-American coach, Steve Wilks. They only let him go for a year. That was when Arizona tanked so they could draft Kyler Murray. And then they bring in Cliff Kingsbury, who I've repeatedly on this show said is an absolute joke of an NFL coach who had a losing record in college. We talked about this. His credentials sucked, but because he was a quote-unquote brilliant offensive mind, Steve Wilks out the door, Cliff Kingsbury in the door. The second is we're seeing something happening right now. The Vikings are on the verge of hiring Kevin O'Connell as their head coach, who, for those of you who don't remember who the heck Kevin O'Connell is, he was a former backup quarterback for the Patriots who has no real coaching experience, and yet he is the most qualified candidate to replace Mike Zimmer, who was probably one of the least qualified candidates in the first place.
I don't get it. I mean, Mike Zimmer was an awful coach, but to replace him with someone who has no coaching experience and who was a backup quarterback in the league and never started an NFL game, or started an NFL season, I don't get it. Put Brian Flores in there. Put who's the old coach of the Texans?
David Culley
in there. Put someone that knows the game in there. Put someone that's experienced the NFL in there. And don't put Kevin O'Connell, who's just going to tank games for you.
Yeah, and final thought for me on this is, Cole, every time the Patriots played the Dolphins the last 2 years, and for the record, Brian Flores has led the Dolphins to a winning season the last 2 years, which is more than he can say for most of the Dolphins seasons leading up to that point. But I was always worried because Flores, I thought, was a really great defensive-minded coach. He always gave the Patriots a hard time. Belichick raves about him. And so, look, the bottom line is things don't change. It's the same business-as-usual mindset in the NFL. But I do have one funny thing to add about this. There was a comedian, Cole, and I can't remember off the top of my head who this was, but he does this whole riff on intentional but fake texting. So basically, you pretend to text someone by accident. So let's say you were texting your friend Alex about your friend Brady, and so but you allegedly tried to text Brady and not Alex, but you text Alex and you're like, isn't Brady an awesome kid? And you're giving him a compliment, so it looks like Brady sees your compliment. So it is kind of funny that Bill Belichick confused Brian Daboll with Brian Flores. Like, I can only imagine Bill Belichick's text string of all the people. Wouldn't you pay so much money to see who's on Bill Belichick's text string?
I would for sure. It's probably Brian Flores, Brian Daboll, Brian Hoyer.
Yep. Right. Imagine how many. That's a great point. Imagine how many Brians alone he has on his text string.
Brian Regan.
Yep. So, but Cole, the real story here that we got to spend a couple of minutes talking about is Brian Flores' accusation that Stephen Ross offered him $100,000 per loss to tank games. And Hugh Jackson, the former Cleveland Browns coach, has now come out and said that in 2016, the Browns owner also did the same. And Cole, I have to tell you, if you think back, think about Deflategate and Spygate and the punishments and the media coverage and how horrible that was. That's level one. Level two, brain damage from all the bad hits in the NFL and how all this evidence is coming out, how these NFL players are dying early because of all the injuries they're suffering. NFL barely changed anything. Yeah, they put a couple of rules in place, but really didn't even address that. This is tanking games. This is a shoeless Joe Jackson in the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah.
This is Pete Rose, banished for life from baseball. We've never had an owner of any sport accused of intentionally trying to tank games and the owner being directly connected. So my question, Cole, is what does Roger Goodell do about this? What happens to Stephen Ross? If this is proven to be true and Brian Flores says he has evidence of it, what happens to Stephen Ross?
I don't know, because Roger Goodell's a clown in the first place, so I don't know if he can make the right call, but I think if
I love that you got the right call in there.
Well, thank you.
That was excellent.
I think if that's someone logical, was the commissioner of the NFL, someone that knew the right decision to make, I think Stephen Ross is gone. I think the previous owner of the Browns is gone forever from the NFL, because the NFL shouldn't be a league where you're purposely losing games to get a higher draft pick. I mean, if you do end up losing a game and then you get the higher draft pick, wonderful. Your team's just bad and you get the highest draft pick. But you shouldn't be trying to lose games, because that gives your team an unfair advantage. And so I think that to send a message out to other owners that this won't fly in the future, I think those two owners need to be banished forever.
Well, two things, Cole. I think it's a great point, and I believe I would bet a lot of money that if it is proven to be true, Stephen Ross will be forced to sell the team and be banished. There's not a doubt in my mind that that's what's going to happen. My question for you is, let's look at a bigger picture here. The NBA several years ago made a decision to shift the draft system to a draft lottery. Do you know the history of that? Do you know why they did that?
I do not.
They did that for this exact reason, because teams in the NBA were tanking to get the first pick, excuse me. So the NBA said, look, we're not going to make it that easy that you just have the worst record, you automatically get the first pick. So the NBA puts in the draft lottery. And we've seen some funky things happen in the draft lottery. The worst team doesn't always get the first pick.
Yeah.
So that was the NBA's effort to do that. And is it time for all sports, all major sports, NHL, NFL, MLB, to put systems like this in? Because right now, with gambling becoming such an integral part of sports anyway, should all the leagues go to a draft lottery? Or part two of my question for you is, or do we need to do something even more than that?
Well, I think the draft lottery works really well, because if you tank, you're only guaranteed to get one of the top 14 picks in the NBA. So if I haven't really seen that problem in the MLB, because it's really hard to tank games without it being really obvious. But in the NFL and the NHL, there are ways to tank games that aren't too obvious. So in the MLB, you could put it in place just to be more protective, but I think that all four major sports need to put in a process to prevent this, because it is going to happen. And it probably already has happened, and coaches just haven't said anything. They've probably been paid even more than $100,000 per game to just stay quiet. So I'm guessing this has happened many times before.
Well, that's a great point, because this is the only ones we know about.
Yeah.
We talk all the time we joke about like when someone gets caught at something, and I said this about Deflategate. whatever Brady did or didn't do, many quarterbacks came out and said the deflation of the football is pretty common practice. The Patriots were just dumb enough to get caught. So bottom line is, exactly, how many times has this kind of thing happened in all four major sports and we don't even know about it? And before we move on, I just have one other take on Brian Flores I just want to leave the show with is, you know something? I have a wish, and the wish is that Bill Belichick, in the open coaching vacancy left by Josh McDaniels, hires Brian Flores. Because I got to tell you, Belichick loves Flores. They worked together for 15 years. He raves about him all the time. What a loyalty statement that would be in this moment when all eyes are on Brian Flores. Everybody's against him.
There's no way he does it.
He's not going to. I know, but I just wish he would because it would be great.
The reason I know Belichick loves Flores, but the reason he's not going to do it is because Belichick hates all the attention.
You're right.
Drawing all the attention to his team. And, I mean, maybe if everything settles down in a year or two with Brian Flores and Brian Flores is looking for a coaching job again, maybe that's the time. But if he were to hire him right now, I think that would be against Belichick's practices for the past 20 years he's coached this team.
All right, so Cole, let's before we get off the topic, let's talk about a couple of other coaches of merit. And the first one is Josh McDaniels. Now, I got to tell you, this is the most baffling decision by Josh McDaniels. So Josh McDaniels, who's been very selective, had a chance to go to the Colts, spurn them at the last minute. However, one of the bright sides to that, there's a banner hanging in the Colts stadium that says, "We almost hired Josh McDaniels," banner. But all seriousness, he spurns the Colts, which would have been a good job for him. He's getting other offers to interview. People are trying to interview. Nope, he's going to stay with the Patriots. The common assumption is he's staying with the Patriots because there's a secret agreement, handshake agreement, that when Belichick retires, Josh McDaniels is going to get the job. Now Josh McDaniels decides, I'm going to go to the Raiders of all teams. Now think of how illogical this is. The Raiders are continually one of the poorest run teams in football. Mark Davis, their owner, is a clown. He doesn't know how to run a team. The Raiders have been so bad since Al Davis died. Frankly, they were pretty bad most of the years, even when Al Davis was still alive at the end. Bad ownership. Derek Carr's going into free agency. We don't know what's going to happen with Derek Carr. You're going into a division. You ready for this, Cole? Here's the division Josh McDaniels is choosing to go into. Pat Mahomes on the Chiefs. Justin Herbert on the Chargers. Aaron Rodgers may very well likely go to the Broncos. That's the division you want to play in for the next however many years? Cole, like what in God, that guy, what in God's name is he thinking?
I mean, honestly, I have to disagree with you on this one. I think Josh McDaniels made a smart decision here. I mean, the Raiders have a lot of young offensive weapons. They used to have Henry Ruggs, but they don't anymore, obviously. But they have Derek.
He really pulled the rug out from under that organization, didn't he?
Really quickly. Derek Carr. They have Derek Carr, who's, a middle-aged quarterback, but has so much potential. He was 5th in passing yards in the NFL this year. You know how much I love Derek Carr. I know you love Derek Carr. You call him a winner. They have Josh Jacobs, a young running back that is a receiver out of the backfield. And then they have Hunter Renfrow, who is a Pro Bowl receiver this year. And then you have Darren Waller. So I think Josh McDaniels' brilliant offensive mind that led the Patriots to 3 Super Bowls, 2014, 2016, and 2018, could really turn that team around and make them a playoff team. So, honestly, I like the decision Josh McDaniels
Well, I'm going to tell you why I think he did it. I respect your opinion, and I'm going to tell you why I think he did it. I think ever since he spurned the Colts at the last minute, that is such a socially unacceptable thing to do in the coaching ranks. And I think I think it affected his reputation. And I think that he looked at this Raiders opportunity and started to wonder, how many more opportunities am I going to get based on how my reputation has suffered for what I did with the Colts, and because he didn't seem to want to leave the Patriots. So honestly, I think this may have been a little bit of a desperation move for him.
It's possible.
Because time may have been running out for him.
It's very possible.
And I got to be honest, I'm not super upset. The one other thing I'd cover with you on this is, he is a great offensive mind. I wouldn't take that away. But I don't know how many Patriots games I've watched the last year or two and gone, oh, thank God we have Josh McDaniels. I mean, this play calling is innovative. How about you?
No, it was time for him to go. A lot of reports were saying he was holding Mac Jones back because he wouldn't let him throw the long ball. And Mac Jones, something he really succeeded with in college with Henry Ruggs, is the long ball. And that was his strength. I mean, Mac Jones is a great arm. He's very accurate. So I think that having more of an open playbook with the next offensive coordinator they hire could really help him succeed. And honestly, Josh McDaniels has never been really the type of coach that, even the whole coaching staff has really never been the type of staff to hire weapons. And I think maybe getting a fresh mind in there could start a new chapter for the Pats offense.
Yeah, and I will just say one last thing about this is I do think in Josh McDaniels' defense, specifically this season, I think when you have a rookie quarterback, you want to protect their confidence. And because the Patriots didn't really have the weapons, and for some reason they actually believed Nelson Aguilar was a good free agent signing, I think they were protective and doing the checkdowns and the short passing game. And I think for year one, I generally agree with that, even though Mac Jones has shown in college he has the long ball capability. But I thought this year it was generally the right thing to do. So last thing for this show, Cole, is I know you and I disagree on this, and I want to bring up Andy Reid. And, I watched the Chiefs-Bills game. Chiefs had no business winning that game. You always have to give credit to the winner, but the absolute meltdown by Buffalo at the end of that game to lose that game is just mind-boggling to me. And frankly, to make one point on this, Cole, if the Bills had ended up winning that game, so now the Chiefs would have lost and not even gotten to the championship game. So they barely got to the championship game. They have a 21-3 lead in the AFC championship game against an underdog Bengals team who really doesn't believe in themselves yet. Totally. The Bengals obviously came back and won. We saw it. So here's the story, Cole. 4 years with Pat Mahomes. We have 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 loss. And the other 2 playoff years, he lost both AFC championship games at home. And one other stat I want to tell our listeners. In that Super Bowl game against Tampa Bay they lost last season, didn't even score a touchdown. And in this game against the Bengals, a defense, by the way, who is not considered all that great of a defense, they scored 3 points in the final 40 minutes of that game. So I ask you, Cole, Andy Reid, you're telling me that Andy Reid is such a great coach that he has maximized the Chiefs' talent and Pat Mahomes the last 4 years? The best he comes out with is 1 Super Bowl in those 4 years?
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I say that is because their defense has been below average to mediocre the past 4 years. And they have no run game. Clyde Edwards-Helaire sucks. That was a terrible draft pick. And they really don't have any stud runners. I mean, of course, they have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but that's pretty much it. Those are the 2 only weapons they have. So you can't win a game. You can't win a Super Bowl with 3 players. And I think that Andy Reid has really made the most out of that team. And I think that if they can get some studs on defense or they can restructure that team a little bit on the defensive end, I think they can really be pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah, except the flaw in your argument is, I don't disagree with your comment that their defenses have been pretty average, but the flaw is what I just said about offense. How do you only score 3 points against the Bengals defense in 40 minutes?
No, that's true. That is true.
No touchdowns in the Super Bowl. Come on.
I guess.
It's the offense that's let him down.
It has. I mean, it's tough it's a tough thing because it's hard to say that they haven't made the max out of it when they've made the Super Bowl twice and made the AFC Championship twice. Like, he's putting up Tom Brady numbers. So, he's on pace to win 5 Super Bowls, go to 20 AFC Championships if he plays for 20 years, and he's won MVP twice.
Well, we're talking about Pat Mahomes. We're not talking about Andy Reid. You're right. If you're talking about Pat Mahomes, yeah. So here's my question. If Bill Belichick coached the Chiefs the last 4 years, would they have more than 1 Super Bowl?
Probably, yeah. Because Bill Belichick's a better coach than Andy Reid.
If I'll give you one other one. If Sean McVay, who's 36 years old and he's in his 2nd Super Bowl in 4 years? If Sean McVay coached that, would they have more championships?
No way. Andy Reid's such a great coach. I mean, Andy Reid, his play calling, his development of Pat Mahomes. Just look at Pat Mahomes. He didn't come out of college as like a top QB. Like, he came out of college as like a late first-round pick, and now he's
still a first-round pick, though.
But still, he's in the talks to be possibly in the future one of the best QBs of all time. Like,
You know what it may be for me with Andy Reid?
Tyreek Hill wasn't a top pick. Travis Kelce wasn't a top pick. He's developed all these guys.
Well, wait a minute. That's the general manager drafting these guys. Andy Reid, just because the general manager and the scouting department saw good things in Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, that doesn't mean that's Andy Reid.
But he's still developing the guys.
I guess.
It's just play calling that gets him open.
I guess. I mean, I think the hard part for me with Andy Reid is he looks like a walrus.
He does look like a walrus. I would agree with that.
You know, like Pau Gasol looks like a llama.
Yes. Cole,
we should do a podcast of players that look like animals or coaches that look like animals. That would be a great podcast. Can we think of, let's end this episode of The Right Call. Can you think of any other players or coaches that look like animals, Cole? I mean, Andy Reid, walrus, Pau Gasol, llama are pretty good examples.
Steve Belichick, he looks like a fish.
By the way, can we stop pinning in on Steve Belichick?
Why does he
during
do that with his
games?
lips?
Oh my God, that's
he's like
so bad. All right, well, that's it. So for another episode of The Right Call, for Cole Altman, I'm Mark Altman. We'll see you next time.